All right, good morning, everybody. It's working okay? Thanks for being here. Make sure it's, there we go. Okay, so I'm gonna make an assumption here, and I could be proven wrong, but I think this is gonna be the only talk of the convention that's gonna start with a doctor's warning. You could go ahead and hit the video.
Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Mashburn, and before we go any further, let me give you a doctor's warning. Do not try any of what you're about to see at home. Thank you.
That's Dr. Eric Mashburn. He treated me for my first serious injury in 2005 when I punctured my stomach with 5 swords at once. I couldn't tell him what it was about because insurance wouldn't cover it, but he has ended up being on a bunch of, I've been on about 100 documentaries on sword swallowing, and we always go up to Vanderbilt and do a video x-ray fluoroscope, and he comes up and he's my talking head. So, Eric.
Oh, we heard it enough. Okay.
Forward. There we go.
So I'm going to give you a quick background on myself and how I ended up being here today. I am not a sword swallower, as you can see by the intro, my intro to the book, A Non-Sword Swallower's Introduction. Dan will get into his background, and then we'll talk about some of the historical sword swallowers. So for me, I've always been fascinated by sideshows since I was a kid. And in the late 90s, I met a sword swallower named Johnny Fox. I was publishing a zine at the time, and this was in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And he had this amazing museum. You can, kind of blocking it here, but you can kind of see a glimpse of it on this side. It was packed floor to ceiling, literally on the ceiling. He's got posters everywhere. And I just was amazed at all these things he collected along his travels as a sword swallower. And of course, while we're talking, he pulled out a sword and swallowed it right in front of me, the museum, which was very cool. So I ended up writing about him for my zine and then for Bizarre Magazine. That's what the spread is from. And after I started talking to him, I started writing more and more about sideshow performers and meeting more and more people. And I'm trying to click here. Oops. That led to my second book called American Sideshow, where I met some more sword swallowers, the great Ferdini and George the Giant. This picture of George the Giant is at Bobby Reynolds' house in California, famous showman. He was too tall to swallow a sword in that room, so he's just posing with the swords. I then started working for AOL News in the Weird News department around 2009. They just started up a Weird News department, and so I was tagged as like the sideshow beat, which was really great. My friend was the managing editor, and he's like, I need you on sideshows. We had a UFO guy. So it was a lot of fun. And a few of those stories, of course, were related to sword swallowers. These are a few of the headlines, which I really love. Man swallows rocket-powered sword. Man swallows 100-year-old museum exhibit. That's this guy. We'll get back to that. In celebration of sword swallowing, open wide. That was also about Dan's World Sword Swallowers Day. So again, I'm meeting more and more sword swallowers, writing more about this. This is that article I mentioned, Man Swallows 100-year-old museum exhibit. So I had met Dan years earlier, I think at the Sideshow Gathering, early 2000s.
2002 and 5.
And he was going to be in my area, the Bruce Museum in Connecticut. I live in New York, so this wasn't too far. And he was doing they had a circus exhibit, and Dan had loaned them a collection from him of Edith Clifford's sword swallowers, swords, and all of the different swallowing implements that she's used. And so Dan was doing a lecture there on sword swallowing in this collection. And as the headline says, he actually swallowed her saw and other implements. He can talk more about that, but he was swallowing the museum exhibit that was literally 100 years old. This is me taking a photo. These are my daughters who are with me. She, I think, was 5, Layla, and Scarlett, who's hiding behind her, but has a huge smile on her face, was about 2 at that point. They've known Dan pretty much all their lives, which has been fun for them to tell their friends about. So here's Dan swallowing that saw, the 100-year-old museum exhibit. And so this was 2010 or 2011,
I think. November 10.
10, oh, there it is right there. It wasn't until we were working on To the Hilt that I learned that Ripley's made a cartoon using my photo, which is very cool to see. I wish I knew earlier, but that was very cool to see. And then moving along with Bizarre Magazine, I was still doing some freelance writing for, and I did an article on extreme sword swallowers. So here we have Thrill Kill Jill, who was swallowing swords while pregnant. She did that with all 3 of her sons. They're all fine, by the way, no dents in the head or anything like that. Ariel Minks, who's from Australia, who swallows swords and does acrobatics, cartwheels, backflips, it's amazing. And I had that headline about the rocket-powered sword. That is Murugan the Mystic, you can see here. He's got, I can use the laser here. He's a machinist also, so he was attached like a rocket to the sword and it would drive it down his throat and he would stop it with his teeth before it went too far. So that was a pretty intense stunt. So, you know, extreme sword swallowing. So these 3 were pretty good examples of that. And then I continued to write about Sideshow. This was a project I had been wanting to do for 15 years or so. I finally put it out a couple of years ago. After American Sideshow, the great niece of the rubber skin lady, Aíne Schwarzenbacher, contacted me. She's the woman you see at the top here. She had this scrapbook from her great aunt that she wanted to do something with, so she contacted me about it, and so I ended up writing an article about that for Mental Floss, and then eventually, during COVID, I had downtime, and her husband had downtime, so we photographed all the pages of the scrapbook, and we compiled it into a limited edition book, completely reproducing the entire thing, page for page, wrote an introduction and bios of the performers I could identify. I have 1 copy left here if anyone's interested. So that's kind of how I've been, you know, writing about sideshows and performers all these years. Dan had contacted me several years ago saying he's been working on, you know, collecting information about sword swallowers for more than 20 years, and can we put a book together on it? And I said, yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. So we took that information, researched more, did interviews, and put this book together. And I'll pass it over to Dan to tell you a little bit about more his introduction to sword swallowing.
So in 1997, I heard there were less than a dozen sword swallowers left in the entire world. And at the time, I was a clown. Let me see which one's forward. There we go. I started as a Joey, as a circus clown in 1975. And I was going to school in Iowa over at Waldorf College in Forest City. And this is one of my first tintypes, actually, of me as a clown. This is me with Ringling Brothers Parade in downtown Chicago, about 75, 76, 77. I'm the bald one on the right there. And I taught clowning at Indiana State University for 4 years, fundamentals of circus clowning. So I got into it as a clown juggler. I ran the Jugglers Club in Nashville for 20-some years. And loved clowning, juggling, stilt walking, unicycle riding. But when I heard there were less than a dozen sword swallowers in 97, I ran into a sword swallower, George the Giant, and I said, give me some tips. He said, I'll give you 2 tips. Number 1, it's extremely dangerous. 29 people have died doing it. Number 2, don't try it. Guess what I did? I put that on my list. I practiced 10 to 12 times a day, every day for 4 years, a total of 14,000 unsuccessful attempts before I got my first sword down February 12th, 2001. It takes most people from 3 years to 10 years to learn to swallow a single sword. Some never do. I had a student that I mentored for 10 years, and he still can't get a sword down to this day. So it is kind of difficult, dangerous. We know of at least 29 deaths.
I haven't tried it.
Mark hasn't tried it yet.
No desire.
Anybody want to take a stab at it today? This is one of my first photos of me in about 2001. I began touring with Brooks and Dunn Neon Circus Tour in 2002 and 2003. And I'd done, as a clown, I had worked with Hoxie Brothers, Clyde Beta Co. Brothers, Ringling Red Unit in Madison with Peggy Williams. Is Peggy here today? She's not. But I'd met her and Steve Russell, the clown. And so this is when I finally was making my breakthrough into sword swallowing. And this is up at the Cirque du Soleil up in Brockville, Ontario. A classic photo that was a lot of fun. And in 2006, Ripley's contacted me, Tim O'Brien, vice president, asked me, he said, can you do anything special that we can do? We're doing a Pirates of the Caribbean exhibit at the aquarium. I said, well, I had lived on a little island in the Bahamas for 7 years, wearing a loincloth, spraying sharks and stingrays for 7 years. So I've swum with sharks for 7 years, and I've swallowed swords for 7 years. I can do both of those independently, but I bet I can put them together and do it underwater. So on May 21st, I think it was, 2006, 7, I ended up swallowing swords underwater in a tank of 88 sharks and stingrays for Ripley's Believe It or Not. And that got me my first cartoon, Ripley's cartoon, swallowing the swords underwater. This big stingray, which I love stingrays, but I didn't realize he was about ready to bump my sword, which could have been pretty dangerous. Then I swallowed a red-hot sword for Stan Lee's Superhumans. As a kid, I used to draw cartoons, always wanted to be a superhero like Superman, fly around the world doing superhuman feats and saving lives. And Stan Lee's Superhumans contacted me, and they did an episode on me called Man of Steel. And I swallowed a red-hot sword, heated to 1,500 degrees red hot. And here we got a quick video, if you can play the video. There it is.
There we go.
And this is my blacksmith, Ben Robbins, who had heated this. We created this sword, 38-inch sword. And he lowered it red hot into my throat. Took it out, branded some wood with it, put it in a fish tank, and it just boiled and steamed the water. I was lucky it didn't kind of fry my lips off. It could have gone through me like a hot knife through butter. Then when Mark and I met up at Connecticut, oops, I don't know why this is kind of sticking. See if we can clean that up. Anyhow, let's go back one. Well,
There it is.
that'll work. Yeah, I ended up swallowing 15 swords at once. My personal record was 1 for the longest time, and I finally got up to 3, and I thought, if I can do 2 swords and I stick a third one in between it, and I thought, well, if I can do 3, then I can stick 2 more swords between it, and I worked my way up to 11 and 15. Then I heard in 2013 that the Guinness World Record was 21, set by Shane Hultgren over in Australia. So I broke it by swallowing 29 swords at once. 24-inch long swords, half-inch wide, 1 millimeter in thickness. And that was kind of I couldn't eat solid food for about a month after that. Then in season 3 of America's Got Talent, I was invited on, actually season 1, season 2, season 3 was 2008. All the other sword swallowers said, no, they're not paying anything. They're just going to boo you. You're going to get an X. It's not worth it. It's humiliating. I went on, ended up doing 9 episodes, made it to the Las Vegas semifinals, and made it onto the finals at Hollywood. And then they had me come back again in 2016. That's an 18-inch long sword. That's a 1974 Triumph Spitfire. Never seen that car before that morning. I didn't think I could pull it. Thank you. That was supposed to be a one and done for Ripley's Baltimore, where I pulled a car out of the showroom that was covered in 1 million Swarovski jewels, weighed over 3,000 pounds, pulled it into the Inner Harbor, Baltimore Inner Harbor. And America's Got Talent called me the day before and said, hey, we want you to do that on AGT tomorrow in Pasadena. And I flew from Tampa overnight to Pasadena. And I'm like, what kind of car? They said, I don't know, get here, we'll find a car for you by tomorrow morning. So I had never seen that car. That video ended up getting over 500 million views. Then I get called from Italy, and they want me to come do it for Italy's Got Talent, France's Got Talent, Israel's Got Talent, Croatia, Germany, Spain. It's been about 15 of them. And 2-3 years ago, I ended up doing Sweden's Got Talent in Swedish, Germany's Got Talent in German, Canada's Got Talent in Canadian, eh? And I've had a blast with it. It's taken me to 60 countries around the world in 16. So anyhow, it's been a blast. It's kind of been fun. So here we talk about a little bit about some of the sword swallowers. When I was 20 years old, I had gone to India as a Lutheran missionary from Waldorf College with this crazy character over here, Von Versteeg, and from Iowa. And we were missionaries in India, in South India, in a place called Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh. And in Tamil Nadu, come to find out, that's where sword swallowing had started, well, actually Andhra Pradesh, in a tribe called the Kandadora tribe, about 4,000 years ago, 2000 BC, according to my studies of the ancient Sanskrit. As far as we can tell, the very first sword swallower from South India was a little Indian fakir guru by the name of Ramaswamy Rajendran Gupta. Actually, he went by the name Bob. So, anyhow, sword swallowing started in India, as far as we can tell, in about 2000 BC. Moved north into ancient China about 1000 BC. From there, moved over into Greece and Rome in the first centuries. And from there, went north into Europe in the Middle Ages, where it was actually outlawed by the church. I find it kind of ironic that people who were risking their lives to entertain people would be put to death because of it. That was kind of interesting.
It was witchcraft.
Witchcraft. They thought that was pretty weird. And I've performed in Africa and other places, and the Africans still think it's witchcraft. Their eyeballs just about pop out of their heads, so it's kind of fun. So these are some of the sword swallowers' images from India and the Middle East. And about, it came to the United States about 1814, 1817, 1819 are some of the earliest ones we know. There were two Indian sword swallowers from Tamil Nadu, from Madras, from Chennai, where Vaughn and I lived. And one of them was Ramaswamy, and the other one was Senasama. And
yeah, so this is Ramaswamy, who, as Dan was just saying, came to England with a troupe of Indian jugglers, as they were called, in about 1814. You can see him performing small in this beautiful giant theater. And this article, this is actually from 1826. They're performing around England and Europe for many years, clearly. But you can see here, it says how, amongst other things, they will be doing the most astonishing performance, swallowing a real sword, 2 feet long, never attempted by any other person. So this was really new entertainment in Europe, in England at that time. It's very exciting. And so then, as Dan mentioned, it came over, they toured around Europe, but it also came over to the United States. And in 1817, if you want to click ahead, Senasama came. You can see here, this was an article saying, first in America in New York in November of 1817. And he toured up and down the East Coast, all the different cities along the eastern border.
should I point this
And in addition to performing sword swallowing,
where should I point this?
it says here how he also was doing cups and balls, so he was doing magic tricks. He was hanging a 23-pound stone from a hook in his nose and swinging it around, kind of the stuff you see in sideshows today. So that goes way back to 1817 at least. And he swallowed a sword. It says down here, a new sword that was 22 inches in length, which will be introduced for the inspection of the audience, and then he swallows the whole thing whole.
I find it kind of interesting. In India, a sword swallower is called a galawala or jadawala, and that means juggler or street performer or magician. They just kind of have a generic term for it. They don't necessarily call them sword swallower at that point.
Yep. So there we go. Over in France, this was a sword swallower named Jacques de Follet, who started swallowing swords around in his 60s. He got a late start. He was working outside of Paris in a quarry, and he was go to taverns after work, and people would notice how he was just gulping down massive volumes of liquids, like unusually large volumes of liquids. And so someone said, hey, can you swallow that canary over there? It was in a cage, alive. And Jacques said, sure. So much to the chagrin of the canary's owner, he did that, the whole bird, feathers and all. And then he started swallowing other things. He's like, well, I can do this. And word got around, and the theater owner in Paris gave him a contract to perform at the theater. And so he started swallowing whole potatoes, hard-boiled eggs, frogs, more birds, a snake, as you can see there in the picture, and money. If you gave him money, he'd swallow it, and then he got to keep it. Probably didn't want it back. And so then, we mentioned that these troops of Indian jugglers were performing around Europe. So they performed in Paris at the same theater, and Jacques saw them swallowing swords. And he wasn't about to be one-upped by these guys, so he taught himself to swallow swords as well, and then pull them back out, and like everything else, it just stayed in there. And so he became a sword swallower as well, which you can see in these images, swallowing the swords, and then whatever else they could find for him to put down his throat. This is Professor Moses Berg, who grew up in Germany and performed as a youth there in circuses, and then immigrated to the United States just prior to the Civil War. And then at that point, he joined the Civil War, he signed up, and he was horribly injured multiple times until finally he lost his leg and had to leave the battlefield completely. He fought through a lot of other injuries. He moved back home to Texas, where he had his wife and several children, and to support them, he sort of took up the circus arts again to make a living. And you can see here in the image, he had a peg leg. There's a notch cut in here so he could walk on a slack rope with his one leg. And he carried a stove on his back. Then he would cook pancakes on it and serve food from the slack rope, kind of like what Blondin did on the tightrope. He also learned to swallow swords along the way, so he'd swallow swords up there with his oven and his peg leg. And then when, unfortunately, he fell off that rope and broke his other leg. But it healed, and he got right back up on the rope. And then one day the rope snapped, and he fell again. And this time the stove fell on top of him because it was on his back. And that proved fatal after a few days, unfortunately.
So in about 1893, 1894, there became a sword swallow. Sword swallowing first became real popular in the United States at the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. But the first ones we know about that were very popular were about 1890, 91, 92, early ones. And it was this guy here, Chevalier Clicquot. And he was a famous sword swallower. He would swallow swords, sabers. He would swallow a sword attached to a gun and have it shot down his throat.
Timepieces. Yep.
Timepieces, pocket watches.
You'd hear the ticking in his stomach.
He'd swallow it.
Swallowed it.
Yeah, they'd let him listen to it. And he claimed he was a French Canadian that he'd learned down in Uruguay from a guy with a machete. But his real name was Fred McLone from Chicago. Of course, he was a performer, so he kind of exaggerated and sounded a little bit more exotic. But here he is swallowing the rifle with the sword on the end of it being shot. The rifle would go off, and it would propel the blade down his throat. And about the same time, there was a kid from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, named Delno Fritz. And Delno, at the age of 11, had hopped a train, fell off the train, and lost a leg. So he had a peg leg. And he, during his recuperation between ages of 11 and 15, he somehow learned fire eating and got absorbed into that, became a fire eater, and eventually learned sword swallowing from Clicquot. And then these two guys ended up performing back and forth at Austin Museum and Huber's and up in Chicago and different places around the country within weeks of each other. And it would often one-up each other. One would swallow 5 swords, and then a few weeks later, the next guy would swallow 6. We don't know if they were friends or rivals and had a competition, but they would swallow pocket watches, and they did much of the same thing.
If I can add in one story about that. So Delno Fritz, like Dan said, also swallowed the pocket watch. But there was one instance where he tried to pull it back up, and the chain broke, and he couldn't get it out. It was stuck lodged in his esophagus. And fortunately for Delno, there was a doctor in the audience who came up. He had forceps in his pocket, and he reached in and he pulled out the timepiece, which, just in time, or Delno would have run out of it. So it worked out.
So Delno got in 1896, right after he had started sword swallowing. He was just a young kid, I don't know, 17, 18, got hired by Barnum and Bailey Circus to tour Europe, England. In 1896, moved over to London, performed all over Europe with Barnum and Bailey. From 1896 to 1899, while he was in London, he taught this 13-year-old girl how to sword swallow. Her name was Edith Clifford. And in 1900, Barnum and Bailey had a female sword swallower by the name of Mademoiselle Aíne, who was on the cover of all their magazines in Germany and everything. In 1901, they hired Edith Clifford. By this time, she was 15. She married the rubber-skinned man named Thomas Holmes. And they got married when she was 15, had kids when she was 15, 17, 19, and she had a cannon with a bayonet attached to the cannon that would be shot down her throat. The only injury she had at one point was the cannon exploded and burst into pieces. She never had a sword swallowing. Yeah. And she would swallow this sword she worked with Barnum and Bailey from 1901 to 1906, and then with Goldmer Brothers. I noticed the Goldmer door is right over here. I was pleased to see that.
And the saw that you swallowed is right there.
Yeah, that's the saw that I swallowed that belonged to her in the early 1900s. And she also swallowed 3 different swords at once. The saw, a giant straight razor. She'd swallow up to 24 swords at once, little tiny ones. Well, I own all of her swords. I had bought a collection of swords on eBay from some folks in Ohio, And just to tell a quick story, they delivered it to me in Nashville where I was. It was on a big piece of plywood and it had all this stuff on it, a bayonet and all these different things, a saw and giant scissors and straight razor and stuff. I said, who did this belong to? Any idea? Where'd you get it? They said, no idea. My dad got it from a garage sale in the 1950s in Canton, West Canton, Ohio. And there was a photo on there of, they said, we think it's a German sword swallower by the name of Edith Bauer, because it says Stuttgart, Edith Bauer. So I'm looking for years for Edith Bauer and couldn't find any Edith Bauer who swallowed a saw and all these things. And I'm sitting in church one Sunday morning, I just got done with the worship team, and I'm going through my phone, I typed in Edith Bauer, and I brought up my own Sword Swallowers Hall of Fame, and it said Edith Clifford, who married acrobat Carl Bauer, who swallowed this, and I went, oh my gosh, I own her swords! In church. And it's like if you found out you owned a Rembrandt or a Stradivarius or something, you know. And so I own her giant straight razor, her saw, a bunch of other things, and the cannon that Harry Houdini talked about, that, or the bayonet.
Before you go on, Dan, I want to point out one other thing because I love this image. As you can see, it's the Cliffords. It's not Edith Clifford, singular. Her husband here, you can see how many Edith Cliffords there are swallowing all these different crazy things. And then her husband has the job of handing her some swords. Big role in the Cliffords there.
He died in 1910. She married Carl Bauer, the acrobat, in 1912. And then in 1919, or 1718, she was back with Barnum and Bailey, and Barnum and Ringling merged in 1918, 1919. They went out in March. Harry Houdini came and saw her swallowing the cannon, swallowing the giant straight razor, the saw, all these things, and he wrote about her in his book called Miracle Mongers and their miracle workers and their mongers.
Miracle mongers and their methods.
Too early. So I own all of her implements right now. About 350 swords that belong to sword swallowers of the past. And then Delno Fritz, we're back to Delno, yeah. He ended up, I own a bunch of his swords. He became a major sword swallower and actor in Hollywood for many years in the 1920s. He, after he left Barnum and Bailey in London, he moved to Scotland and ran a music hall there for several years and then moved back to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. His Scottish wife, Maud, had died, and he married another Maud called Maud Deline. And in 1920, she was performing, she was also a sword swallower. They were performing before King George V on a ship, and she handed her swords out for inspection. Somebody nicked the blade on the edge of the table. She didn't realize it.
Real, right?
You have to see if it was real.
Steel.
And she swallowed it, and it snagged on her, fish hooked, and it got stuck inside of her and couldn't pull it out, and she ripped it out, and she died within 24 hours. So Delno needed a new sword swallower, female sword swallower to teach. He had this thing about teaching female sword swallowers, I guess. So he taught his niece, Edna Price, who was 17 at the time, to swallow swords, and she became a major sword swallower with Ringling Brothers and Ripley's Believe It or Not, swallowing. She was claimed to be one of the first ones that swallowed the neon tubes. There were several people that claimed to be the first and only ones to do it. But back then they didn't have internet, so you could get away with that. And what do we have here?
This is the Ajax video.
Oh, let's put on this video. This is should be the mighty Ajax, young Ajax. He started at the age of 14. And he had started as a pigeon trainer doing Punch and Judy shows and then started working with circuses in 1904. He did Coney Island for years until the 1950s. And so he was kind of a major one. And
swallowed the red hot sword as well.
He swallowed the red hot sword.
He put the red hot sword in the sheath and swallowed the sheath and then pulled the sword out before the heat transferred through the sheath.
This is him later with Coney Island. He did kind of a pirate shtick and did one of the first X-rays. And in 1927, there was this fellow. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, yeah, this is John Ball, who came from a circus family. His dad was a lion tamer. His mom was a performer as well. And so he followed in the family's footsteps. He started clowning when he was a kid, and then he became a lion tamer. And then a lion mauled him bit off his face, attacked him. That was pretty bad. So he said, well, I want to stay in the business, so let me find something safer to do. So he stuck swords down his throat instead. In addition to the sword swallowing that we've been talking about, and that you're seeing here on the left side here, he also created this corkscrew sword, which you can see in the center. And if we go to the next slide, we can see another image of that. This is from the 1930s, and that's basically like winding it down your throat and then unwinding it back out as you're going. So a very difficult kind of sword to swallow. Dan actually ended up with that sword.
In 1927, he was wintering in Hoxie, Kansas, met a farm girl there. They hit it off. He stayed the winter. He taught her sword swallowing, and her name was Esteline Lovin, and she became Esteline Pike. And she was Ringling Brothers' key sword swallower for 30 years, and then performed at Huber's Museum in New York. And when in 1935 they gave birth to their first son, Jim Ball, they called Lucky Ball Jr. And Lucky learned at the age of 12 in 1947. He was the world's youngest sword swallower at the age of 12. And in 1957, he was on What's My Line? Let's see if we can get that to play.
So next slide.
Next.
Yep.
With his mom, they were performing at Madison Square Garden.
Swords or fire? Properly, I hope.
Swords or fire. Now you want to go on from there?
Well, I might as well. All right, fire.
Fire.
No.
So close.
How many of you remember this show?
That guy that you just saw, Jim Ball. Go next slide.
Did I?
He's still swallowing swords now. So you saw him in the 50s there. He's still swallowing. He's going to be 91 this month.
In 2017, I was driving through Kansas, moving from Florida to Wyoming, and I connected with him, pulled in to meet up with him. He was a little skeptical at first, and he showed me his swords, his collection, his pictures of his mom and his dad who were famous. His dad was on the cover of Life magazine, Look magazine, doing an X-ray. He was in a film with Shirley Temple, Wee Willie Winkie, and films with W.C. Fields and all these guys back in the day. And he told me about his dad swallowing this corkscrew, and he said, somebody stole it, though. I don't have no idea where that's at. And I said, I own that corkscrew. And he said, really? And so I ended up later on giving him his dad's corkscrew back, and he gave me one of his mom's swords that she had swallowed with Ringling and Ripley's, and this is his collection. He holds the distinction of being the world's youngest sword swallower at 12. Today he's 91, the world's oldest sword swallower. He's been doing it for longer than anybody else, longer period. I'm blonde, I can't do the math, but a lot of years. And both of his parents were famous sword swallowers, which is pretty rare. Most people don't have parents as sword swallowers. So I gave him back his dad's corkscrew. Last year, Mark and I had the honor of inducting him into the Coney Island Hall of Fame. And let's see if this video will play. I'll let you run it.
But a few years ago, a friend of mine, Dan Meyer, bought my dad's corkscrew on eBay and returned it to me. And I also gave him one of Esteline's swords in return. So in honor of my father, I'm going to swallow that corkscrew for you today. I hope this works. I never know. I'm just as curious as anybody else when it comes to any sword that I swallow. Let's see how this works. The easy part is getting it down. It's a little tricky getting it back out. You got to twist it around a little bit.
So Jim is featured in our book, To the Hilt, as well as his mom and dad, who are all three famous sword swallowers. In 1868, sword swallowing helped medicine when a German doctor by the name of Dr. Adolf Kussmaul developed the rigid endoscope using a sword swallower in Freiburg, Germany. Sword swallower's name was Der Eiserne Heinrich, and his assistant said, hey, I found this guy in a bar who can swallow swords. So they got him on a table, put a rigid endoscope down him, had a little mirror on it and a candle, so they could actually look for the first time down into the stomach using this mirror and reflection with the candle. And so it's to this day well known. My German sword swallower, Franz Huber, who is like my brother, has swallowed that rigid endoscope in Freiburg, Germany, and we've swallowed swords on his grave together in Germany. But this is Dr. Adolf Kussmaul. And here he is with Der Eiserne Heinrich. And that's where the blade goes. This is from 1894.
Here it is from more recently.
This is my chest x-ray here for a documentary. And here's the little video. When I swallow a sword, I have to repress the gag reflex, flip open the epiglottis, slide it down between the lungs, nudge the heart to the left, slide it down into the stomach, through the lower esophageal sphincter, past the liver and kidneys, all the way down to the duodenum, the bottom of the stomach. If I go further than that, all the way down to my fallopian tubes. In 2005, I was approached by a doctor, being the president of the Sword Swallowers Association. I get emails from doctors and people with swallowing disorders around the country. This Dr. Brian Whitcomb over in Gloucestershire, England, contacted me. He was a radiologist and he had a fascination with cool x-rays. And he and I worked together on a paper on sword swallowing and its side effects. And we realized there wasn't much research at all on sword swallowers, so we interviewed every known sword swallower around the world. We were published in the British Medical Journal. I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV sometimes. So. And after that, we won the Ig Nobel Prize in Medicine at Harvard for our medical research on sword swallowing, which took us on Ig Nobel lecture tours all around the world, Harvard, MIT, Oxford, Cambridge, and universities in countries all around the world. We were in London, and Brian came back. I'm having breakfast. He walks in. He says, "You got to come over here. We got to go across the street to the British Museum. I just found a sword swallower's sword and his heart. And here's the sword that had actually gone through his heart. You see the little red probe here. Whatever. The little red line here through his heart. And I actually got to hold the heart of a sword swallower and his sword. And this is his gravesite. It was Alexander Durov, who had died in 1942 from impaling his heart. So
I'm going to take you through a few other quick stories. I want to make sure Dan has time for a quick demo. You might want to see that.
You guys want to see a demo?
So in addition to these historical sword swallowers, we also talked to a lot of modern day sword swallowers, and we got their stories, just kind of crazy stories of learning or accidents that happen, incidents with volunteers and so forth, and they're all told in their words in the book. This is Tommy Breen, who now owns the World of Wonders show. He took over from Ward Hall and Chris Christ. So he talked about doing some entertainment before the show started. When people were lined up waiting to go in, he'd go up, swallow a sword, and ask someone in line to just withdraw the sword. And it was very clear directions. I'd bend over, you pull the sword out. Well, this young woman got her directions confused and pushed it in. And so he had to quickly back up and thankfully survived. But you don't expect that. This is Chris Steele. This was a couple years ago, Coney Island, swallowing 7 swords. He talked about the problems of travel with lots of swords and other kinds of crazy equipment for his act. And his suitcase had been inspected, so when it came down the carousel, it popped open and everything spilled out. And you can kind of see he's heavily tattooed, maybe looks a little menacing, and he's got a lot of swords and weaponry just spilling out at the airport, so it's not a great look. We have a quick video of him. I guess we try to show us quickly.
Can you hit the video?
Thing? Amazing.
When I met up with Chris, he gave me those 6 swords. He had a bad injury a couple of years ago, and nearly died, was in the hospital, punctured himself, and almost died several times.
This is Jelly Boy the Clown. He does a lot of creative things with sword swallowing, pushes in all different directions. So here he created a flamethrower sword. So he swallows the sword, bends over, and shoots about 4-foot flame right out of his throat. And then Dan and I, having all these conversations and interviews with sword swallowers, we thought these are kind of fun conversations. These two sword swallowers talking shop. I'm listening in, so I'm kind of helping guide conversations. So we made a podcast. If anyone's interested, you can look up the To the Hill podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And we got people holding the book and swallowing swords while they're holding the book for us to promote. But that's the book. We have a few copies for sale. You can buy them online if we run out here. But with that, I want to leave Dan some time for a demo. And then if anyone has questions, we can take questions as well.
I'm going to honk Mark's horn. He's just finished a second book as a follow-up to ours, The History of Sword Swallowing. He's finished a book called On Point, A Knife Thrower's History of Knife Throwing, and that should be coming out sometime in the next year or so. And then he and I are working on a third book in the series called Life's a Blast, Human Cannonballs, History of Human Cannonballs. And I just got a text from Brian Miser, if any of you know him, was with Ringling for 10 years as their human cannonball on fire, and his wife Tina and their daughter Skylar, who's their headliner right now. And I'm meeting up with them next month in Phoenix and West Williams. But anyhow, if any of you know any sword swallowers from the past, happen to remember any of these sword swallowers, come up and tell us about it. If you know of any human cannonballs, we're actively researching for human cannonballs, so please come up and tell us about it. And we do have a few books for sale, and we've got a postcard that also has the podcast information on it here. If you want to buy the book online on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, Target, whatever, come up and see us. Please leave us a nice review, it would be nice. Would you like to see a little demo of sword swallowing? Let me get this over here real quick. We don't have much time. I'm not gonna rush, but anybody know what this is here? This is Edith Clifford's giant straight razor. If any of you happen to have a giant straight razor laying around the house like this, don't swallow it, okay? I'm going to try and swallow it for you. Better not. I end up with a really big smile. Let's see what else I got in here. Instead of the corkscrew, what I've got here is what's called a serpentine sword. Alex Linton was with Ringling Brothers for many, many years, and he called it the shimmy shwabble. You can see my Adam's apple wobble back and forth. Out of all 350 swords, this is my most difficult, most dangerous sword. It stretches the Adam's apple back and forth, the esophagus. It's got a teeny tiny point that could very easily puncture my esophagus. I've almost died 4 times, in the hospital 4 times. So out of all 350 swords, this is my most dangerous one, which is why I don't swallow it. I just want to show it to you. So, you want to see it? Oh yeah. This is not Edith Clifford's saw. This is a replica I've had made of her saw. I left her saw at home, but it's not a lot of fun, but here's Edith's saw. Thank you. Have you ever heard the phrase, you gotta see it to believe it? Now you can go home and you can say, I believe it because I'm gonna do one last one for you guys. Aíne, would you come up here, please? So what I've got here is a 24-inch long sword. Come on up here. You're nice and tall. Come on up here. Good. Arms straight down. Breathe in. Relax. Breathe out. Breathe in. Lean your head back. Open your mouth and say ah. Anya, do you believe you can swallow this sword? No. Do you believe I can swallow this sword? You know what? You guys know what the difference is between us? It's belief. I believe I can do it. Anya believes I'm nuts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swallow this sword. This is 3 times more dangerous than regular sword swallowing. 3 times more dangerous. Danger number 1, this is a very heavy sword. It's 30-some inches, 24-inch long blade. But the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to drop this sword into my body, no hands, like this. I'm going to let go of it with my esophagus and just let it drop into my body like this. When it hits the bottom of my stomach, I'm going to hope it doesn't puncture. I'm going to attempt to double my body directly in half and bow at the waist like this. So you can all get photos of it. I'm going to bow from this side to this side. So get your cameras out. I'm going to come around 1 time and 1 time only so you can see all the way down to the pit of my stomach. Danger number 3, I'm going to ask a total stranger or a new friend, Anya, to extract the blade from my stomach.
Don't push the blade in.
Yeah, just don't push, okay? When I come around, are you right-handed or left-handed? Right-handed. Oh, darn, it's a left-handed sword. Oh, wait. There we go. I'm going to come around. I'll give you a little nod or a wink and just pull it straight out, okay? Yep. Don't take your time. Pull it out very quickly. If you take your time, my stomach can retch. It can puncture the bottom of my stomach, so pull it out very quickly. But not too fast or it'll slice the sides of my throat. Okay? Just kind of a medium. Whatever you do, don't push. Don't push. These are new genes. I don't have to get the hole repaired again.
I am not this kind of doctor.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is 3 times more dangerous than regular sword swallowing. 3 times. This is 3 times more dangerous than regular sword swallowing. Your mission. Here goes.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
There you go. Give her a big round of applause. Thank you for not killing me, Anya. Now who wants to see Anya swallow the sword? Thank you, dear. Thank you very much. I'm Dan Meyer. This is Marc Hartzman. We've got the books for sale out there.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Bruce.